Welcome back, and we're going to take a look at the second section of Chapter 8, and that's entitled How Species Interact with Each Other. And this is where we stopped last time, so this should start to look familiar to you. Okay, we're going to first define at least one term here, and that's the word niche, N-I-C-H-E. Okay, and some people mix up the words niche and habitat, but it's a little bit different. The niche is actually the role that a species plays in an ecosystem. It includes things like its physical home, environmental factors, how the organism interacts with other organisms, okay? But it's that pattern of interaction that becomes its niche. So you don't just talk about the fact that you live someplace or that there are certain environmental factors that you have where you live, but how are you interacting with other organisms, perhaps to work with those factors that are there already. Okay, and as I said already, it's not the same as habitat. Habitat is actually the location of the species. So sometimes people confuse that a bit. So when you ask someone if they found their niche, it means not just do they go someplace or exist someplace, but how do they fit into that someplace? Sometimes people ask you, have you found your niche yet? Okay, particularly for the freshmen, have you found your niche yet at high school? In other words, do you have a place that you fit in? You know where you're going, with whom you're interacting. Not just the fact that you're in this building or in our building, but that you are actually interacting in there. Yeah. So I guess to put it simply, this is from your text, a niche is an organism's pattern of use of its habitat. How does the organism actually use what's there? It's also, in some cases, and again, I guess the school is a good example, because what's the function of the habitat? So here at school, you would say, of course, you're in the habitat of the building, but what the function is to learn, to educate. So therefore, how do you interact? What's your interaction with that environment? Okay, to continue, there are 5 major types of species interaction. Okay, and some of these you probably have heard before, and some will probably be new to you. Okay, we're just going to list the 5 for now, and we'll come back and talk about each one. So just to take a look at the list, we have competition, predation, parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. So the 5 basic types of ways that species interact with each other are the 5 that are listed. They start in your textbook on page 218, and there's actually a chart on that page that I think I have on the next slide that I want you to look at, because it shows you very well what's happening from one species to the next when you try to compare those and see what's going on. So I'm going to show you the slide, show you the chart. Again, the same are listed here. Notice they put predation and parasitism together. So if you didn't get them from the last slide, they're listed here. They show you with this slide actually some of the organisms and how they're interacting with each other. In competition, usually it's believed that both species are harmed. There's a negative effect from one to another. Okay, and here the fox and the coyote are predators of the same prey. So they're after the same food, and therefore one of them loses out both time. One time one loses out another time. Okay. If we take a look at predation and parasitism, okay, in one case the first species benefits, but the second one is harmed. In other words, species A, the first one, is feeding on species B. And here they show you the kit fox hunts and feeds on the kangaroo rat. So in this case, you would have, this is the fox who's of course benefiting, and the rat is being harmed. Parasitism works the same way, and your book makes a point when we look at the stuff in the textbook tomorrow in class. We will be considering, the similarities there between these two. Mutualism is kind of nice. Both species benefit. Okay, each species is helpful to another. Here they show you the yucca moth pollinating and laying eggs on the flower, and then the moth larvae actually spread the seeds. So they work together, and both come out better for having interacted with each other. Commensalism, one species benefits, one species gets something from this relationship. The other species is not even affected by it. For example, they show you the picture here of the bird, the wren, making its nest, and it doesn't have any effect on the cactus. Now, please be sure that you're able to give me some examples of each of these as we go along, so you can follow in your textbook. You can listen to what I say. Perhaps you can come up with some own examples of each of these interactions. Okay. And I think I just went the wrong way. Hang on one second. No, okay, right. Okay, competition. What is competition? Okay, you saw in the chart a sense of that. Competition is which the relationship exists where different individuals or populations try to get the same limited resources. Remember, we said that they're not always going to have enough food, that there are factors in the environment, and when competition takes place, then unfortunately somebody loses out. I think we talked about predation in the last video, and some two species being predators of the same species. Okay, why does that happen? Because each individual just has less access to whatever they need. This doesn't have to be something alive. It could be something like water. You know, water might be limited in a certain environment. If water is limited, then and the species are competing for water, that's also an issue. What is taking place, or to go back to the vocabulary word that they introduced here, was the niches are overlapping. Okay, so when different species are trying to use the same resources, you both want the same thing. You know, you both want to have the same water, the same food, and you can't get that. So that's when competition is taking place. Indirect competition is sometimes the two species don't have any contact or direct contact with each other, but they're still competing. And I talked about water. Well, that would be an example. You know, it's not as if they're attacking the water and tugging the water between them, but that's a case where they're both after the same source or resource, but they don't interact with each other to get that resource. Okay. How do species adapt to competition? Sometimes their niche is restricted. In other words, the function, the role that they play in their habitat and their environment might change. And sometimes when that takes place, then they'll just do without something if they can. Second type of interaction is predation. And this is when the two species are after one species, okay, I'm sorry, I said that, yeah, that's correct. Two species exist and one is after the other, okay. Obviously, as you saw in the chart, one is going to do okay in this one and one is not going to do okay. And if you remember the food webs from a couple chapters back, this probably makes sense to you that one predator might be the prey. So in other words, they're eating something maybe it's lower on the food chain or food web, and then they become the source of food for something higher up there. Most organisms can avoid, they have mechanisms that are in place in their adaptations that they have to an environment or to other organisms to avoid or to defend themselves against predators. And you know, that's whether it's running away, whether it's camouflaging into an environment, but most species have some kind of mechanism that helps them to exist. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist if they had nothing to fight against the predators. Third type of interaction is parasitism, and this again is two species where the parasite benefits from the other species and usually it harms the host. Okay, so it's a lot like predation. Parasites, of course, you might have heard about things like tapeworm and such. Those are parasites that we try to avoid in our own lives because we know that you can get sick and get harmed from that. Things like a virus, ticks. A tick is a good example of a parasite. A worm, intestinal worms, not worms in the ground, but intestinal worms might harm the host, but they might not be harmed themselves. So what is a parasite? A parasite's an organism that lives on another organism, feeds on the other organisms, and then again, they're examples. Okay, I'm doing this quickly. I know you can pause this if you need to, but I want to make sure I get through the sets of interactions here. Along with parasite, you have a host, and that's, of course, the organism from which the parasite takes its nourishment. Okay. Fourth type of interaction is mutualism. Mutualism is when two species are interacting, remember from the chart, and both are benefiting. Okay. An example of mutualism was, I think we had the plant and then the larvae that, you know, the plant seeds were spread, but then also provided nourishment or perhaps a place for the plant to exist. Commensalism, the last type of interaction, is an organism is an interaction where two species are existing, of course, and one benefits and nothing happens to the other. Orchids, I think we looked at orchids in the last chapter back, and orchids, for example, have a commensal relationship with certain kinds of trees. Okay, they live on the tree, but they don't really hurt the tree in the process. Okay. There are a couple other terms you need to know that deal with how species interact with each other, and although they're not considered the actual ways that of the 5 ways that species interact with each other, they certainly help you understand some of the relationships in an environment. Symbiosis is the first. Symbiosis is when 2 different organisms live in close association with each other, and usually one of those species benefits. On the other hand, we talked about, I believe, coevolution earlier, and coevolution is when you have the 2 species evolving adaptations to each other. I think we had the example, if I recall, there was a bird that had a nice long thin beak so that it was able to take nectar or food out of a flower that had a long skinny stem to it, the flower did, and then the bird helped the flower by spreading the seeds of the flower, and at the same time the flower gave the bird food. Okay, but the point isn't just that that's not just commensalism, but that's also an example of coevolution, where the species were both evolving these adaptations that either, in this case, helped the benefit and benefited the 2 organisms in question. Now, sometimes that's where they harm each other, and again, we'll take a little bit better look at that later on. Okay, let me go back because you're not going to be doing that quite yet. Okay, so that pretty much covers what you need to know in this second section. As I said, sorry that I went through that quickly, but I wanted to be sure that I got through all of the 5 types of interactions before the slides time finished out. And as I said, you can look at that more slowly, and also we'll look at that together in class. Thanks again for your attention, and we'll finish up Chapter 8. By the way, Chapter 8 only has 2 sections, so this is the last section here. So we'll take a quick look at this and then move on. Thanks.